Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is fellow breaking news reporter Derek Saul. Derek, thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me again.
As you know, the most recent CPI report shows that inflation hit a 2-year low. What can you tell us?
Yeah. Right now, inflation's sitting at 3%, which sounds really great considering that 2% has kind of been that target number that the Federal Reserve has been looking at. And historically, that's where inflation typically sits. But there definitely is evidence that it might be a rosier number than perhaps expected because pretty much all of the price decreases are coming from the energy index. And so gas prices have come down significantly after briefly peaking last year amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which of course is still ongoing, but there's been a stabilization in confidence in terms of the commodities market, specifically related to Eastern Europe. Um, so inflation is definitely coming down, but also the concept of deflation or disinflation, where prices are actually decreasing, that honestly probably will never happen. So we're still looking at, compared to pre-COVID levels, prices have still increased at roughly a 20% level, 15 to 20%.
Heard you say this is good news, but so for consumers right now, how should we be feeling? Aside from gas, where else did we see prices decrease? Let's talk good news first.
Yeah. So used cars and eggs, which very random, but those were both things that were in the news too. I mean, especially like early in the pandemic, I know like used car prices were absolutely crazy. So those are down around 6% year over year. And then eggs are down 8%. I mean, that's honestly not that that's particularly a big driver of things overall, but that's something like 6, 7 months ago, a lot of people noticed that egg prices were crazy, but that was just a temporary blip. So there's been stabilization there. So yeah, and the good news is that there are definitely places that maybe you're not saving money, but it's not going to be just the unbelievable like gouges. I think too, just generally, there's definitely been like a stabilization with goods. Just that I don't think people are going to be going to grocery stores or big box retailers and just seeing stuff completely not on shelves, or just being like, wait, like how is this one thing like randomly so expensive? Which I feel like with all supply chain issues early in the pandemic, it was like it would just be, yeah, like random things. You'd like go to the store and be like, wait, why is that $10? Like why can I not find like this like very random ingredient uh, or item? So yeah, there's definitely been stabilization overall, which I would say is positive the most positive, clear takeaway for consumers. And I don't think that there's a pathway now that all of a sudden, unless there's some sort of like earth shaking event, that there will be some crazy inflation past where we are right now.
Well, let's knock on wood for that. And let's talk bad news now. I want to point out a number that you pointed out in your report. And you indicated that overall prices for items excluding food and energy are up 4.8% year over year. That's not good. What are the biggest offenders here?
Yeah, so I will say, I mean, that's honestly the better number than the 3%, just because, again, I mean, including energy, that is a big input, but it's kind of disingenuous to be like, oh, like what actual policies are determining that it has nothing to do with gas prices. So definitely the number one thing that I'm sure you would agree on of that I have noticed has been very expensive is rent. So rent is 8% up year over year, and I think that's, I mean, that's something that has not come down. Then also the equivalent equivalent monthly payment for homeowners around 8% as well. So those two, I think, are really from Americans' pockets, are that's what's going to be most significant. I mean, it's fun to talk about like egg prices, but obviously, I mean, if you're paying 8% more in rent but paying 8% less for eggs, I would sure assume that most people tend to spend more on rent than eggs. And then there were other things as well, like car insurance. The Labor Department noted that was one of the biggest drivers of numbers going up. So that's kind of that offsets also cheaper prices at the pump and also you know, less expensive used car prices. So there's a lot of things that are moving in competing directions. But yeah, and that's if you're thinking too of okay, like when will interest rates maybe come down? As long as that number at 4.8%, that's the more pertinent number, and that's honestly seems like that will be very challenging to bring down without there being a significant drawback in consumer activity.
I do want to talk about the rent aspect a little more. It affects me, you, many Americans. And when you hear the number, it's up 8% year over year. I mean, that really is just eye popping. And I've had the opportunity to talk with movers and shakers in the housing market over the past few months. And we've all come to the conclusion that most renters in the United States right now are rent stressed. So one, why is this happening? And two, is there relief in sight for renters?
So I think number one is basically it is going to be passing along whoever owns the property, passing along costs. So early on in the pandemic, things were, as we mentioned, the supply chain, and just where raw goods materials were more expensive, everything like that. And so that kind of drove certain prices being passed along to renters. And then now with mortgage rates, I mean, they're up from, they were 2-3% just over a year ago. Now 30-year mortgage rates are over 7%. So with the costs of owning a home being more expensive, that's going to, one, I guess it would make someone that is a primary homeowner that's maybe just renting out in the short term is able to make that a rental property. So they would pass along those costs to the renter. And also, probably more importantly, is that a heck of a lot more people are going to want to rent versus buy. I mean, if there's people that are on the cusp of deciding whether they want to buy a house or not, like I know, well, I can't say I'm particularly close to doing that, but I know if I was, like, I would be like, well, I don't want to get the 7.2% mortgage. Like, I want to wait until things come down. So it's kind of, the demand for rental has been so high, and as prices keep going up, so it's kind of, things are just really out of whack.
Let's talk a little bit about interest rates. As you and I know, the Fed has continuously over the past year hiked them up in an effort to combat inflation. Is there any indication that this strategy has worked?
Yeah, it's, look, it obviously depends on who you talk to, but I think that at this point, it seems like the Fed has navigated the situation pretty much as good as you could hope. Just with inflation has come down, but we're not, whether or not the U.S. does enter a mild recession this year, I guess is still up for debate. But it definitely doesn't feel like, oh my God, it's like a 2008 like event. So I think there was the whole concept of the soft landing of you want to slow down price increases, and then also I will note, so like wages have gone up over the last few years, but just not at the same rate that prices have gone up. It's something like wages have went up 14% and consumer prices have went up like 18%. So there has been like a pretty decent disparity there. So yeah, I would say it's probably been fairly successful so far. I think really the main thing to watch is we've seen stocks broadly have recovered this year pretty remarkably, and that's really due to optimism about things. I mean, like AI, where things that really would It's not like the Fed was anticipating that a year ago. But depending on the more bearish people that you'll talk to, it's really of, okay, like higher rates are going to drag in corporate earnings. These stocks are going to come down, or the growth is not going to be there. So I think that's absolutely a valid concern. But yeah, I think to this point, it would be pretty challenging to give the Fed anything other than a pretty positive report card for the last year and a half.
Derek, a few times in this conversation, I've heard you say inflation has come down, but, and I think that's a really good indication of this current CPI report, which shows that it's a mixed bag for consumers. So what is this indicating about our economy right now?
I think I would say like the biggest takeaway is that there's just certain changes that we're not going to see. I think post pandemic, where just things went so out of equilibrium. Of it was all this weird, like especially like 2021, it was like all these stocks go to all time highs while people are at home and like not spending. And there were obviously stimulus packages, everything like that. We're just all, and then like unemployment was all of a sudden like all time high, like 20%. And then all of a sudden, like within a year, it's like down to historic lows. So it's just, I think the main thing is that everyone needs to kind of recalibrate what their expectations for market conditions may be. So yeah, and like if, again, I mean, the point I said before, which I think is important to emphasize, is that it's not like things don't become less expensive without a major recession. So it's like, if you're rooting for, oh my God, like I hope like housing prices go down by 20%, it's like, okay, like that would mean that first of all, there would have to be some sort of like, again, like really negatively impactful event. And then that would mean that economic conditions would really deteriorate. So I think it's walking this tightrope where it's, look, the policy is going to be more restrictive, but it's kind of being in that middle ground where maybe you're going to get stabilized lower inflation. You're still not, we're just going to have to live with things are more expensive than they were 3 years ago. Like things won't come down to, if you're hoping that things will be the same price as they were 3-4 years ago, that's just not going to happen. I mean, unless maybe you're rooting for, oh my God, the Fed is just going to raise rates to 10% or something just absolutely crazy, which no one is projecting, to really draw the US into a significant recession, to just really reset everything. And that is definitely not going to happen.
You did mention earlier in the conversation, you brought up 2008. You said we're not going to see a recession of that level. Do you think we will see a mild recession, though, soon? We've heard the word recession looming for over a year now. Is it going to fully come to fruition?
Honestly, I mean, I feel like personally, I'm like a little tired of like the designation of like the recession or not, because I think there's obviously like there's technical definitions of a recession, but I think if we're not, say, as we were looking at a year ago, 8 months ago, where it was like, oh my God, like there really could be like a prolonged recession where there's going to be significant job losses, and there's going to be, people are really tightening their spending, like some sort of certain aspects crashing. Like, we haven't really seen that. I mean, not to say that there haven't been job cuts, obviously the bank failures. So I think we'll see certain hallmarks of a recession, and again, I mean, kind of depending on the most commonly used definition for recession is just looking at quarterly gross domestic product decreases. But I don't think that's like not the colloquial definition of like recession, where it's like what people would actually care about on a day-to-day basis. So I feel like it's the most likely scenario, and based on what I've seen, I haven't looked recently, certain recession indicators, like the Fed has said they expect there to be a mild recession to happen later this year, but it's definitely no guarantee. But I think we'll see a period of slower growth, but I think it's challenging to imagine a scenario there's going to be like significant downturn.
Well, I appreciate your outlook, Derek Saul. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much, Brittany.